Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. This is Season 2, Episode 37.
All right, welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. This is Andy Littleton from Mission Church. I'm sitting across from Eric Siepen from the Village. Oh, wait. That's not Eric Siepen. That's Kevin Sommitz.
It's a little different. Hey, we stayed on point. We talked about the book mostly.
We talked mostly about the book.
Except for the harem, and that was a little bit of a left turn. But other than that, I feel like we unpacked it pretty good. And if you're interested in Andy, his dad, or anything, I don't know. I actually have nothing to say.
So I've got a little book project releasing later this month called The Little Man. Kevin is one of the few people that's read the whole thing, and he does an awesome job of kind of helping me share about the project. So stay tuned, and we hope you enjoy. Good morning. I am not sitting with Eric. Not sitting with Eric Siepen. I am sitting with Kevin Sommitz, who, if you've listened, into the deep tracks of Faith Over Breakfast, you've heard this man's voice. We used to be on a radio show with Kevin and his friend Sam. That's really where Faith Over Breakfast began, in a way, because we would all grab a breakfast over at Rincon Market in Tucson, Arizona.
Yep.
And we would talk about what we were going to talk about on the radio, and we'd have this really lively discussion. Then we'd get on the radio, and we'd say a few of those things.
Right. Yeah, it was. I remember the idea started for me a couple of years back. I wanted to have a faith section on our radio show, and I thought about intelligent, handsome pastors that I knew, and obviously Eric was one of them. Mm-hmm. You came to mind, and so I called you up. I don't know that we had spoken once.
Yeah.
But I said airtime. You came running, basically, and. And you put up with a lot for me. That was a very anxious time in my life.
Okay.
I mean, I think you could probably tell I was having to put together this performance where 9:06 started and I was talking live. Now, maybe I was talking live to 6 people,
right?
But it still was, quote, live radio. Mm-hmm. And I was a mess. I was angry at Sam constantly because we had a bit of a broken marriage at the time. And but it was fun nonetheless, and it gave you and Eric some chemistry and said, hey, what if we could do this without Kevin? Maybe
or
not
Sam.
That. Or Sam, or the confines of live AM radio.
Right.
And so here you are. You've been doing this for a while, Faith Over Breakfast.
Yeah, we're, I don't know, a couple years or something.
That's kind of amazing, actually. Yeah, almost 2 years.
Getting there. Getting there.
If you started the summer after we quit the radio show, that was April of 2017. Anyway.
And including the fact we've missed some weeks, that I'm thinking about our episode count, which, Eric's,
what is the episode count?
Well, Eric's going to be frustrated with me because we're supposed to say it.
Right.
And I never know what it is, and I don't know what it is today. So it's episode
87?
Yeah.
It's something in that range, I would guess, right?
Somewhere in the 70s or 80s.
Okay. Which that, to me, means about 2 years because you've missed.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, and Kevin, by the way, goes to Eric's church.
Yes.
So we still do have a representative of Mission Church in Tucson, Arizona, and the Village in Tucson, Arizona at the table. So, yeah. But Kevin, you wanted to come on.
I did. I missed the airtime. I missed people hearing my voice. No, that wasn't it at all. I ran into you at Crave down the street.
Yeah, little coffee shop here in town.
Yeah, and so
our listeners in Japan.
Right, and they are there.
There's a couple.
Right. Ni hao, right?
Oh,
no. Oh. I think that's Chinese.
You probably just
just skip.
No.
We can edit that out. No, so I ran into you at Crave, and I knew about your project. I knew about this amazing thing that you were doing where I wasn't quite sure, but I thought you were hybridizing an extended sabbatical with driving to Oregon to get a truck, with exploring your dad's roots, with also writing a book about it.
Right. Yes.
And I vaguely knew that, but thought, that's a lot, and that's really cool. And did he actually follow through with it? Because it's one thing to say, I'm going to write a book, and then it's another whole thing entirely to write that book.
I just met a buddy who told me that he was writing a book, but he had, it was collecting dust. It'd been a couple years. So I have the same, I've heard that several times and thought, Well, we'll see. Hopefully you do or whatever.
Did you think that about yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, I really wondered. Am I? And so I made, I did a little Indiegogo fundraiser thing to to have some resources available.
Did.
Yeah. And not a large one. I didn't make a huge deal out of it compared to how other campaigns are done. But I promised the book this month, 2019 June.
Right.
Didn't say 1st or 31st or 30th or whatever. Thank goodness, because it's not released yet.
We're still early June.
We're early June. It's going to happen. It's going to happen here in June. So I did that because my assumption was if I didn't do that and people hadn't put money in,
right, then maybe it would never happen.
It would never happen.
That's smart.
Yeah, so it wasn't. It of course the resources were helpful, but it had something to do with it's like having pre-orders because people said we'll support this and we get a book, and then I had a couple other little perks, but it's like they need to get their book
right
by the time I said they get their book.
Right.
You
will have made it a disrespectful thing if people give you money and you say you'll give them a book and you do not. In fact, yeah.
Right. So I have that awareness driving me to get it done soon, which also probably means there will be a couple of missed punctuation marks, and I'm sorry for that. But the good thing is it's an Amazon direct to print, so I can always go in and change that. And then
so you print it when someone orders it, then it gets printed.
Then it gets printed.
That's cool.
So you can go in and edit it later, which helps.
Yeah. My thought was not being skeptical that you would write it, but kind of amazed that it. Like, hey, like it's hard to do anything in life. It's hard to say, hey, I'm going to clean the kitchen and then actually do it.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
To put down the thoughts of your experience, but really an autobiography or a biography about your dad's entire existence. Not really chronicling it, but who he was.
Right.
It's a tall order. So I think I saw you in May or April at Crave and said, how's
Probably
the book
May.
going? And you said, oh, it's done. I have a manuscript and... Yeah, and so I wanted to read it.
Yeah,
and
I told you I could use a little more feedback for the final. Yeah,
right. So I offered to quote edit it.
Right,
and so I read through it, every page of it.
Yeah,
which I think
you are one of two. I think I'm not sure if Rod made it through the whole thing.
He may have.
He seems to know things about it. So,
right.
One of 2 to 3 who read the whole thing. So far.
So I got to read this thing cover to cover, and I really liked it. And it really good job, first of all. I think the first thing I would say to people about it is if you like Andy, you're going to like the book. If you don't like Andy...
You're going to hate this book.
Yeah, because you get inside his mind and you feel like he's talking to you. You feel like you're just kind of snuggled up in a chair, and he's sitting and he's saying, well, and he's telling you all these stories. So if you can picture Andy's voice, his face, his inflections, it really matches to all that's happening in the book, which I'll start with one thing, and that's, I think, mentioned later in the book. You see someone at a party or something, and they find out what you were doing, and they say, wow, it was someone in prison or someone who had been estranged from his son.
Yes, right. Yeah, it was at a church service in Mexico, so almost a party. He was disabled.
Prison part. Okay, yeah, right. He was disabled, right?
He was disabled,
and he was in his 50s.
Yeah, I'm guessing there. I didn't ask.
And you paint this really good picture of a guy who's estranged from his son.
Yeah,
finds out what the gist of what you had been doing, and just says, "That's amazing. What an honor it would be for my son to write a book about me."
Yeah, you could just see this longing that he had.
Yeah,
like I just wish that's what my son and I had, that somebody would want to write about me when I was gone, right?
Right.
And my dad never would have thought that I would, interestingly enough.
Right.
Yeah, he never would have guessed it.
Well, for the reader, it took us outside of, because it's near the end of the book, I think.
Yeah, it is.
It took us outside of what we're doing, and it's like, oh yeah, by the way, this is about someone who wrote about their dad, who's now gone.
Right.
Who can't, in the same way that you and I can, read and appreciate it. But
right.
It's hard. What I want to say in that is that you have honored him just in the writing of it in a way that's so profound and beautiful and like the idea of it, and then the execution, the follow through, and then the way you were able to pull it together. If no one ever reads the book, or if people read it and think it's dumb, like you will have honored him tenfold, regardless.
Right. And that's, I think, what motivated me to keep going a couple times, is because I thought, I like to write, but I never really learned how to write well. And I did this through a time of really intense grief, part of it. And it wasn't a time where I was really going, I want to write like technical, great work. This is just kind of coming from my soul, just trying to just get out on paper. And I was trying to figure out why my dad was so important to me. Cause in many respects, I could look at our life and our relationship and go, other people have way more engaged fathers. Why is it that, and I'm not that attached to a lot of people. I kind of wish I was more attached to folks, but with my dad, there was just this connection to the heart that I couldn't explain. So I wanted to figure it out. And then what I started to discover along the way, I mean, with that guy and several other people I talked to, is that they either wished they had that, or they did experience something of that, and they were thinking about that themselves, and they wanted to read someone else's words, someone else processing that, to help them process for themselves. I mentioned my buddy Jesse in there, and his dad died when he was a kid, and I thought, would you really want to read about somebody whose dad died when they were in their mid-30s? And he was like, yeah, I kind of want to think about what that might be like. And so then I thought about myself, and some of the books my dad read. The first book of my dad, I read 2 of his favorite books right after or just before he died. Interesting. I'd really been thinking about him and the things that he connected with late in his life for the first time. And one of those books was just a son talking about his little lessons he learned from his dad. And that's called Little Britches by Ralph Moody. And it's not that well written. A lot of critics kind of tore it apart as just not great writing. But it's like this enduring classic book that people have connected with for years and years. And my dad read it. And when I read it, it brought me to tears a couple times, because I saw he actually did what that dad did. And I think because he wasn't close to his dad, I have a feeling he learned it in the book. He learned how to be a dad from Charles Moody in the book.
Wow.
At least a little bit. And I thought, man, here's this guy, Ralph Moody, who, there are millions of people with dads. Ralph Moody decided to write about his life and his dad. And for whatever reason, many, many people have picked up this book and read it. And my dad was one of them. And my dad learned lessons on how to be a dad from this person he never met.
Well, I wanted to get into that, so let's talk about it now. Little Britches, the cover, if you see this book, it's a really beautiful take on the cover of Little Britches. It is, yeah. It's you and your dad, and I think you're sitting on a truck, and you have to kind of see it.
Yeah.
But what I was curious about, and you touched on it a little bit, like why did this connect to your dad so much? Why was this? You said it was his favorite book, maybe.
It had to be up there. It was one of a series that he loved, and actually one of the later books when he was younger was what he was looking for when he met my mom. So my mom owned a little bookstore with a friend of hers named Jacqueline, and my dad was trying to find one of the books, and it was out of print. It was called Shaking the Nickel Bush, and it comes later. Ralph Moody wrote several books about his life. The first one's about his dad because his dad died as well, and so his dad's not involved in the rest of them other than memories. But my dad just connected with Ralph Moody's story, starting with Little Britches, and he kept those books. My mom doesn't even she wants to hold on to them for now. Like I'm sure she'll let me have them, but she's like, can I have that back? So they're on her shelf, his set, which is the ones I read. I read a few. But yeah, he was trying to find this book when he met my mom. He kept coming into the bookstore, and my mom and her business partner noticed this 30-some-year-old, nice, quiet little man coming in, kept looking for Shaky the Nickel Bush, and he claims he had no ulterior motive. My mom thinks he kind of liked being around her, but she asked him out. That's what happened in the bookstore. Yeah.
And reading the book and knowing your dad, that it
makes total sense.
Yeah, it follows.
Yeah, it totally follows.
I love what you did there. You I think you're a good impressionist, and you slowed. It sounds like you spoke like something like either your dad spoke or maybe how they talked back in the 60s. Yeah. But you said, "Oh, this 30-year-old man." So
I do that a lot. Yeah,
you do that a lot.
Yeah,
you did it when you're impersonating Dwight, and I like it because it's a calming cadence. Yeah. Is that how your dad spoke?
Yeah, a lot. Often a lot slower, and it was really hard, even because you edited the book and were getting rid of all the "I'd" and "we'd," and my mom did the same. She went through. She's a great writer, and she just she tore up my manuscript, which is great.
Yeah,
but it was hard because some of that was I was trying to write like that. I was trying to write to my dad, voice. Trying to write to kind of small town men. Not to great readers. I didn't want. I had to go in and give it a little more descriptive language here and there, and Rod really mentioned that, and I thought that was true. But I also didn't want to flower it up too much because I wanted it to sound right. Mm-hmm. I wanted it to kind of sound like, yeah. I mean, I know how to talk like that.
Right.
I don't always, but I can, and I see myself doing it every once in a while. Yeah,
it's very interesting. So you've touched on the big question of, I think, why did you do this? Why did you write a book? I mean, it's one thing to set out on a sabbatical and to say, hey, I'm going to explore this truck and I'm going to explore my dad's roots, but I'm going to put it all down on paper. Like that's actually a step beyond what was necessary. Like
totally.
Your dad's in heaven now. He's going. Actually, just going up there was enough. And getting the truck back, like you didn't have to try to put it all down. What made you say, "Hey, I want to encapsulate this on paper"?
Yeah, and that's something I've been thinking about for a while. Before he got sick, before we knew he had cancer, so I actually wrote probably about 2 years prior. I think I took a walk with him, or I did something with my dad, and I thought I gotta write down what it is I appreciate about him. And so I wrote this little, I don't know, maybe it was like a little chapter or an article or something that just kind of extolled the praises of the little man, which was his term for himself, which was a little bit...
Oh, that was his term for himself.
That was his term for himself and other people like him. Yeah, and that's the title of the book. Right. Yeah. Yeah, so he would refer to himself or he would refer to a group of folks as the little man. And there's an Alan Jackson song by that title, which that was his favorite modern country singer. And I'd be willing to bet that's where he got it. But yeah, I wrote out this little thing that's kind of included in the introduction of the book. I actually took a lot of it out because it kind of tried to paint a whole picture, and I didn't want to do that. But sections of it are in the introduction now. But then I thought immediately he won't be comfortable if I put this online or if I show this to very many people. He'll be kind of weirded out by that. That's not.
Well, if he's really a little man, then that would be.
It's not. It doesn't fit. Like it. Yeah. But I also thought I want people to hear people like him. I want people to listen to people like him, him and his friends and the people that he loved and noticed and cared about. And they just don't. Because I grew up in churches and going to men's conferences, and there was something I was always uncomfortable with because every time it's some guy who knows it all, right? Up front.
Very articulate,
very sure of himself. And I would always find myself through my life sitting back going, I don't know if I believe you. Like, I can say stuff like that too. But I just don't know if I believe you. Like I'm interested in somebody who grinds it out day after day, you know, who actually, and who has major setbacks and still plows through them, not who's out on a book tour. Like, yeah, you could talk about manliness because you're making $300,000 on this book and you're making money on the tour, and you have to like manliness because that's what you write about, you know. But I thought, I want to write about a guy that doesn't know squat about manliness in his own opinion. Like, that was my dad. He never once told me, here's how to be a man. If I asked him, how do you be a man? He'd go, oh, son, I don't know. But I watched him and I learned a ton. So that's what I wanted to explore. And I kind of wanted to share that perspective that it's never, my dad would never have a Twitter because he didn't think he had anything to say. You know,
you talk about manliness and the way that Christ came into this world and showed what it. I mean, I think he probably showed masculinity and femininity.
Yeah.
But one part of the masculinity that he showed was a coming under, a death to self.
Yeah.
Decreasing of, he abased himself to the, not considering equality with God something to be grasped.
Right.
And so, actually, maybe that is manliness, and that's a more interesting type of manliness, facing setbacks, overcoming, being quiet and still, sacrificing. That's like 1% of what our culture is going to extol as manliness, though.
Right. Yeah. And to be honest, I was watching the news more around that time, and just all the political events, and I just thought the men who we listen to are the loudest men.
Yeah, right.
And I thought, I just want to do my part. I know a man that's not like that. He was my dad. Mm-hmm. And I want to tell his story. And if 5 people get onto that, that's great. That's fine. And if people want to rip the book up because it's not that well written, like, great, I'm in good company with Ralph Moody, and that's okay. But I'd like to tell the story of somebody who isn't yelling at us to get our attention or claiming to know it all. Just show a guy who is faithful throughout his life most of the time. Except for when he blew it.
Right. Well, he wasn't perfect. I remember about 2/3 of the way through the book, I thought, okay, like, Andy, I'm going to have to tell you, like, this guy's not perfect. And you wrote a book.
You're making him sound like he's just the best.
He's no sin. So this is Jesus? Did Jesus just die? And then you touch on, actually very vulnerably, some intimate conversations you and him had, confrontation of sin, broken relationships, ways that you have not fathered me well.
Right.
And it's, I don't want to say shocking, but it's like, oh, okay. Wow. Now the veil's been pulled back a little bit. And what I think that does is it incites a really interesting conversation that I'd like to try to have. And that is, so I like to ask questions in relationship. So, but I was at someone's house the other night from church, and I just like rapid fire peppered them with questions over the top, it felt like. And at the end of like 3 hours, these were questions about the church and about, them personally. And they were like, wow, well, I'll have to remember that you are like the professional question asker, Kevin. And I came away and I thought about it more and went back to that person and said, hey, listen, I'm sorry that I kind of came way over the top, and because, well, what happened is I went home and my mom was asking me questions in a similar fashion, and I was like, oh, this is uncomfortable actually sometimes when someone's just like, what about this? Well, what happened then?
Yeah. Sometimes you're like, I just kind of want to be at the party.
Yeah. Can we just chill? Right. Yeah. So I went back to her and said, yeah, I'm sorry. And she said something that she had heard from Eric's mom, actually, Patty Seepin, and that is that we sin out of our strengths. Maybe you've heard her say that, but I thought it was interesting because she's saying, well, no, that's a good thing about you. Like, you're inquisitive and you're a people person and you are good at drawing things out of people. So that's good.
Right.
You can also use that, though, to create control and to not talk about yourself and all these things.
You can control the narrative.
Right.
I've observed that occur many times. Yeah, not just you. I'm just saying, like, where you go, you're asking so many questions, but you seem like whoever I'm engaged with, it's like, this almost seems like I need to check in with you because like what's going on? You know, why are you so intent on eyes off
anything
me?
but me? Right.
Right.
So the sinning out of our strengths thing is what I think is interesting and probably could relate to your dad here. And that is where we go, I look at the strengths that you just named, and that's humility, and that's meekness, and that's faithfulness. But then there's this line of humility that goes into shame.
Yep. Absolutely.
And so if his strength is humility, then he can also sin out of that strength by buying into shame and saying, I really am less than.
Yep.
And not just like in a servant way, but like I am less than.
Yep.
And
he definitely did think that way. And I tried at the beginning of the book to say like even his term for himself could be derogatory. Like the little man wasn't always just like, he wasn't saying humble. He was saying kind of disadvantaged. I'm
a victim.
Like, yeah. No, I think he in many ways saw himself as a victim, and he was one, but that identity took over sometimes. And so I kind of wanted to take the term and flip it a little and show that it was even. It's like if if I'd been this thoughtful throughout my life, I would have loved to have had that conversation with him and say, Dad, I love how gentle you are and kind and humble. But those aren't just things to kind of hide behind. So you don't have to deal with conflict, or you don't have to like lead the family in a given moment. You can lead out of humility, but you don't have to be so humble you don't do anything.
Right.
And so frankly, I mean, part of why I was so surprised later in life at my admiration for him was because I also spent a lot of my life really annoyed with him. I mean, there were a lot of times where I just was like, where are you, man? Like, what, aren't you going to say something? Aren't you going to do something? Like, would you please tell me what to do with I'd go with him. What do you think I should do? And he'd go, oh, I don't know. And I'm like,
Dad, I need right.
For gosh sake,
but this is such a tightrope that you're walking here. Like the one of between meekness, meek shall inherit the earth, and then the passive shall not. Like, so
it's
hard to discern, and because like I would take your dad 10 out of 10 over the guy who's arrogant and confident and sins out of his confidence and is a jerk most of the time to, he can kind of tend to have a low opinion of himself. And that's where maybe I think his sin comes in.
Yep.
Is he doesn't believe that he is who God says he is.
Right. No, yeah. That was the huge struggle for him. I mean, I think he believed in it every time he took a step forward. Every time he stayed married another day and went to see his son another time and went back to work another day, he did, in a way, walk in faith in who God said he was a little bit, but that was, but barely.
Right.
Like not with the confidence that I think if he'd seen the dignity he had, because of being an image bearer of God on the same level as everybody else,
right?
That he could have. I think it could have been sweet. I think that would have been better. But I'm not. But I've never met somebody who's maximized all that.
No, that's what I think. So really, as I consider for myself right now, I go, man, what a call to say, okay, can I stay humble, but also ask God, wait, who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Let me keep going back to in Christ, who am I? And who I am is actually, in a way, it's way better than I think I am, and way worse. Like it's just a different type of definition for what makes up my identity. And I would think that in your dad's life, he wouldn't have looked any less humble if he would have come the closer he came to that identity. And he did.
Right.
Like you said, every step was, okay, I'm going to take you at your word, God. You say this about me.
Right.
Because that's what I do is he says this, and I say, no. Trust me, you're wrong.
Yeah.
The Proverbs say, crucible is for gold, and the furnace tests silver. I think I got that reversed. Praise tests the heart of a man.
Yeah.
When someone says something about you that's positive,
right?
What do you do? What I did do is I reject you first off and say, no, wrong.
Yeah.
And that's sin at some point when God's saying, I'm pushing in and I'm speaking this over you, not because so you can have your own party, but so that you can walk into that strength and then you can go use it in the kingdom. And when you say, it's a type of pride, actually. It's a type of twisted pride.
Well, because if you take on that compliment, like now I got to live up to that again or something like that, and it's kind of easier to just stay in this little woe is me place where it's safe and where I'm good at it. Like I found in my life, being in like B-level positions, I feel really like confident I can be good at that.
Right. Set the bar lower.
Right. And
when you're killing it, it's like, dang, like, wow.
When you're mildly killing it, right?
Right.
And then, this is a little tangential, but there was a time at our church, and I don't know why this just became a pivotal moment for me. So we had early in planting our church, we had a big Sunday. For us, it was like a bunch of people came. It just felt great.
Was this Midtown or Mission?
This would now be Midtown before we did the merger. And Kira, a friend of ours, came up to me and was just so excited. I was like, that was awesome. Like, oh my gosh. And I nearly completely rejected her and her celebration.
Wow.
I was so insecure that like, this will never happen. This was a one-time thing. It was just a fluke. Yeah. These people aren't going to come back. And everything in me wanted to celebrate, but I was scared to. I was scared that if I start celebrating this kind of stuff, the letdown that's going to happen later is just going to hurt everybody. But I hurt Kira. Like, I think.
Right.
I mean, I think she just seemed deflated and kind of sad and I don't know, it was just a really sad moment. And I've thought about it so many times. Like, I do that a lot, I think. And it's not good, and it's not loving, and it's self-protective. And anyway, recently I had a meeting that went really well with some folks, some business owners in the area. And we went outside, and it dawned on me, like, this is another one of those moments. And one of them was just like, that was the best meeting I've ever been to. Oh my gosh, it went so well. And it was hard, but I chose not to reject it and to like just celebrate with them for a little bit and just go, yeah, like, oh my gosh, can you believe it? That was amazing. Like, imagine what could happen. But that was me. Like, those people don't know how much walking in faith it was for me to celebrate.
So you have some of your DNA of your dad in you.
Oh yeah,
obviously.
Well, yeah. Oh yeah, big time. Yeah.
Another topic in the book I wanted to get into and want to make sure we do talk about is the place where it actually got me when I was reading it and I shed some tears. It's the topic of your daughter Abby.
Yeah.
And it sounds like she had a really special connection to your dad.
Yeah.
And you talk about it a little bit. The first place you talk about it is in the hospital room where he ended up passing away here in Tucson.
Yeah.
And it was the three things, what to know about me. Yeah. And those were...
Yeah, Bisbee, Oregon, and my granddaughter, Abby. Yeah.
Yeah, you just get a picture.
They had him up on the wall. This is when they moved him to hospice. They had this little whiteboard.
Right.
Yeah, and they had that written up on it.
And so that's earlier in the book. And so you get a picture and knowing Abby and knowing that she's like a fully formed adult in some ways, but still a amazing kid. Yeah. And being like, if I was her grandfather and she was my only grandkid, she would be my world. Mm-hmm. And so you get that picture, and then later on you talk about the funeral, or was it a memorial service?
Memorial,
and a song called Granddad?
The Grandpa, the Judds. Yeah. Yeah, it's a sweet little song that I remember listening to on the radio with my dad. And so, it fit. It was, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days is kind of a key line in it. But...
Well, tell me about their relationship a little bit. Tell me why do you think it was so special?
Yeah, I mean, I was going through, when Abby was born, I was going through one of the hardest times of my life. So I had just gone through I was entering into a divorce, I mean, basically, which concluded when Abby was 1. And so it was just a really, really hard, scary, confusing time. For a while I had Abby 100% of the time. New dad, scared, just by myself.
You had her when she was like 1 or 2 years old. You'd have her
for a period of time. Yeah, there was a protective order of custody.
Wow.
And so I was just, I didn't see any of it coming. It was scary. It was confusing. And my parents were just amazing. I mean, I think they would have bonded with Abby anyway, but they just took it. I mean, they just really engaged. They were there for us a lot. And there's just so many pictures of like little baby Abby with my dad. But then the interesting thing is those same pictures exist of him and I, like when I was little, carrying me around.
So he took that same joy in you.
Yeah, which was really cool to observe and think about. And I kind of knew it. There were little, stories my mom would tell of him carrying me around, and this milk jug I would hold. It was like a little ritual at night when I was tired. He'd give me the milk jug, and he'd hold me up on his shoulder. And then he couldn't see my face to see if I was asleep, so he'd just walk me around the house, and then I'd eventually drop the milk jug, and that's when he knew I was out. And he would lay me down in bed. And so, yeah, I mean, he just had, I mean, we have an old picture of him and his little brother, Jake, with him just holding baby Jake, just looking down at him with so much care. I mean, it seems just to be a part of who he was, and the kind of stuff that his dad didn't affirm or notice as being manly at all. He these beautiful things about, I mean, he had this son. My dad was artistic. He liked to make things. He liked to play guitar. He was kind to children, kind to animals.
That's weakness.
And that people viewed it as weakness. And I mean, I don't know. And there's a lot of questions about like gender and all that stuff today. But I mean, I think some of it is I don't know, where do we even get our definitions of manliness, I mean, back then, I mean, I think those were very manly traits, to care for the young and to make beautiful music. Biblically, I mean, come on.
Biblically, and also from this evolutionary perspective, I was talking to a friend about how when, single women, when they see you with children and vice versa.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're good with them, they're like, oh. And because what's going on there is something like, we could mate and he would help with the kids.
Right.
And so your tenderness with a 2-year-old is actually the thing that's going to get you the biggest harem in thousands of years ago.
Wow, interesting. No,
so that's not...
That just soiled the whole thing for me. My dad was just trying to get a harem. That's great. No.
Well, you describe him with such tenderness.
Yeah,
and
he did. Yeah, it was... And I think like my bond with him from an early age had a lot to do with that. I just... I always wanted to be around him. So he didn't exude like perfect confidence or anything, but I always knew I was loved. And I when I think about God, it's similar. Like I'll talk to people, they go, I just don't know if God loves me. And I think, I don't ever really worry about that. And I wonder why. Well, it's because I always knew my dad loved me. Like he showed me what that was like. Now, I didn't always know that my dad would tell me what to do.
Right. Maybe he's absent.
When I struggle with God, it's that God would actually, be involved in this given problem or something like that.
I love that, the process of redemption and sanctification generationally, like your dad did not know he was loved by his dad. And then the next generation, the Holy Spirit enters in, and now you're loved. Abby knows she's loved. And there's a shoot now, an offshoot that is changed.
Right.
It's a 180 from that. And that's really cool.
Yeah. And so when I think about my dad's failures, I also think, man, he turned the ship really far. And there's a lot of faith that goes, was he perfect? No, like not even close. But for goodness sakes, like he cranked the wheel on the ship and moved it from what he was offered. And from what I assume his dad was offered. And his dad, I do need to be careful because he comes across, I did actually even try to soften it a little because, his dad, he just didn't get my dad at all. Right. And I think he thought he would help by being a little hard on him. And there were eras of my grandpa's life where he had some drinking issues. I'm sure that factored in, but he actually improved on some of that stuff. And he and my dad weren't close later in life. And therefore I wasn't ever very close to him. So I don't think we know as well as maybe some of the sisters do the ways that he changed. But we do have some little anecdotal stuff. Like he took one of the cousins, a lady who was drinking too much, out in the garden and just gave her a talk about what this is going to do to you. And, he had made mistakes, but he learned from some. So I don't want to say, my grandpa really damaged my dad, like profoundly damaged him, but I don't want to paint him as like pure evil. I mean, he was obviously a broken, hurting man, lost his parents when he was young. Something happened in World War II, changed his name. We don't know.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he didn't talk about it. He went through probably some real trauma. And so I don't want to.
Well, no, I appreciate you saying that, because there's a kind of a heroes and villain narrative we can see that is actually false. Like that Grandpa was bad, Dad was good, and it's that simple.
And and it's not that simple.
Not at all.
No.
And we're in the same way that maybe your dad turned the ship, ate his dad, from what he had, like in ways
Turned
later
the
in
ship,
life, like began to offer things, and
right.
It's very messy. Onto a lighter fare.
Yeah.
Speaking of fare, food is this part in the book it's a theme throughout, and you must love food. But I loved the way, and I love food too. Everyone that's existent ever loves food. I
know some people that they say they only eat
like just 6 things,
or they eat just to live or survive.
Okay,
I don't understand those people, but I believe that they're right. I believe they believe that.
It's a way that obviously you find comfort, and it almost is nostalgic for you in some ways. But like you talk about it like a lot, and going out, and should we go out and shouldn't. I was confused because at first it was like all we do is go out because Dad loved going out, but then Dad's like, well, we can't go out because it costs too much money. And then even your experience on the road trip, you're eating meals with Dwight, and you're describing the meat, the slab of meat, and it's actually good, and there's a piece of white bread. And so like as the reader, I'm like, you get hungry, but you also see like food. Like I think we think that food is like an accidental part of creation where God's like, they got to eat. But like, no, there's some deep significance in food.
Yeah, the meals on my trip were a huge part of my memories, and it was a big part of my life. It's interesting because we definitely later in life, my parents were never wealthy, but they had a little more margin, and you could tell when that happened that my dad also loved to go out to eat,
Right.
And so the earlier years were, I think he liked it then too, but it was like a treat, and he was frustrated that my mom and I would go out when we had very little money in the bank, and so that was just a point of contention. And my mom was, love my mom, but not a great cook. Not a great cook. Yeah, that just wasn't my mom. And she had a couple standby recipes, one of which I remember liking. And otherwise we tended, you came home a lot to my mom going like, all right, dinner's ready. And it was like lunch meats and cheese and some carrots on a plate with some ranch. Yeah.
So going out was also a way of survival.
It was a survival method. Yeah. So, we all knew that going out was going to be a better experience, and my mom included. She was right there with us. But
I just love that your dad loved it.
He did,
and you do a good job of portraying that, and you love it too.
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, I love it. It's a problem.
Well, it kind of is because it's worse for you. It costs money.
Sheesh.
It's all these things.
I know. Yeah, it's a thing, and it's in my story, which makes it harder. And it's so convenient, and it tastes delicious. I'm sure, juicing tastes delicious too, but I just, whatever. Meals to me have always been a huge piece of any experience. I love food, and I love to eat, and I love trying new things. And, every small time, there were things I didn't mention in the book, but Like when I was driving to the beach, I was just scanning every small town for like a cool looking cafe, and I saw the Otis Cafe off the street, and it had this old flashing sign, and I pulled in there, and I like to sit at the bar at little breakfast places like that and just kind of interact with the waitress. So I sat down. I said, hey, okay, like I don't care what you recommend, but what's actually good here? Like, what do you take home?
Right.
Good
question.
And if it's on the menu, that's fine. If it's not, that's fine. And she brought me out this chicken fried steak, and I do like chicken fried steak, but I have never had a chicken fried steak like that one at Otis Cafe.
Was this in Idaho?
No, this is Oregon.
Oregon.
This was just, I was headed toward the beach. Otis as the town, is a very small town. And I mean, I could not finish it. I was headed to the beach. I didn't have refrigeration. That all made me very sad.
Oh man.
But it was amazing. It was so good. And and she came back around and was like, "Now, come on, I'm right, aren't I?" I was like, "Oh, you're right." And just I love it. Like I remember a little bit about the road and the trees, and I remember arriving at the beach, but I remember that in detail.
Well, you remember the taste. You can actually go back to that chemical experience.
I'm there. I remember the environment. I remember that people were waiting outside, but I was like, I'm not gonna rush. I'm gonna finish. Like, I'm gonna eat as much of this as I want, and I'm gonna drink my coffee. And I remember a lot about that, and it has a lot to do with the food.
So we've talked for a long time here. One last question.
Okay.
But it's not going to be so simple. Talking to Rod again. I'm just going to out. Does he listen to this podcast sometime?
I don't know.
Yeah. We were talking about the book, and he said, "Well, you know who that book's really about, right?"
Yeah, he told me this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about Andy. It's not about his dad. And I was like,
"There's your Rod impression."
Well, I can do a better one.
Yeah.
I've been sick. So yeah, I said, "Oh, interesting," and I kind of see what he means. I don't know that I agree. Like a lot of it, I guess there was a sense as you're reading. I was like, no, I don't know. How do you respond to that? Someone saying, "Oh, this isn't about your dad. This is an autobiography. It's about your desires and who you are." And
yeah, they're hard to disconnect. I mean, and I guess it's like if this were a biography, I sure would show up a lot more than you'd expect. But it's not. It's really more like a travel memoir. I mean, that's when I've thought about the genres of book. This is what I came up with, because I went on trips. A lot of the trip itself shows up in the book.
right.
And I wasn't looking to get the exact story of my dad. I wanted to understand him through experiencing things he experienced myself and interacting with the kind of people that he liked to interact with, or that he connected with. So by nature, if I'm the one interacting, I'm the one on the trip, I'm the one trying to have the experience, like, yeah, you're going to hear a lot from me.
Right.
So I wasn't trying to tell my dad's perfect story. That wasn't the goal. I didn't want to do a historical work. I wanted to go on a quest to understand my father, invite people along for whatever reason they might want to do something like that, which I assume would be because maybe they have thoughts about their dad and they kind of want to get into somebody else's head to learn how to explore that themselves. But yeah, so I guess when he said it, I think he thought he was going to hurt my feelings.
Yeah, that's my assumption.
Yeah, but I actually kind of went, that's actually appropriate to the genre I chose. I went on a trip. Right. I was trying to experience my dad. I wanted to go to the places he went, see the places he loved, kind of walk in those places, think about what I had learned from him. But in all those things, I'm saying what I learned from him.
Well, it's all through your lens.
Through my lens, yeah.
One thing that was not of you that you have taken on is, and it's gold, and it's in the latter parts of the book, but you describe your dad's way of seeing the down and out and the downtrodden, and saying, hey, like, actually maybe these are some people we should invest in and have a relationship with, and you just very simply say, actually, that's a really good idea. And hey, like, if that's one takeaway from the book, for me, it was a reminder to, like, oh, that's where the richness is, like, way richer usually then relationship with the speaker who's talking about masculinity is the person who's whatever. But there's no shortage of people who are broken. And so to move towards them sounds like something he did and that you have modeled after and that you're inviting other people into. And you're like, actually, guys, this is where the restful burden, the easy burden may lie here a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what the key to it for my dad was that he never called that class of people the needy or the downtrodden.
We're all needy.
He didn't just, it wasn't a linguistic choice. He just saw they had challenges in life. He had too. I mean, I think he looked at his own family and went, wow, you know, cause his little brother, Jake, I mean, he's impoverished. I mean, really, there's poverty level and then there's poverty, and that's Jake. I went out to visit him and you know, he sells metal off the property to get food from time to time, and his sister checks on him and brings him something every once in a while. And so I think my dad realized, like, he kind of, you know, not to take God out of the equation, but he kind of just had a couple strokes of luck. You know, he got a job and found a wife who was devout and cared for him and stuck with him. And he could have married somebody who just trashed his life and which happens. And he happened to get into an industry that in Oregon was booming and lost that job, but was able to, you know, get by for whatever reason. And, you know, there were a couple, when we moved to Arizona on accident, essentially, because my mom got sick here, but somebody from church from her work, paid off her hospital bill. Wow. And I mean, we would have fought with that hospital bill for a long time. She had a surgery, and the way that changed things, you know. So I think when he looked at people who were struggling, he went, yeah, I've been there. Right. Or I was real close to that. Or like Spike, who shows up in the book. I mean, he definitely has, I don't think anything's diagnosed, but I went and visited him the other day, and he told me, he said, I can't read. Like, I can't retain, and he didn't say it this way, but he just says, I asked him if he was working, and he said, no, I lost my job. And he goes, it's hard because you have to show me how to do something a bunch of times before I can do it. I can't read a book on how to do it. Wow. And so he's like, it's hard to get a job. And my dad always loved Spike and cared about him. And I don't think he looks at him and goes, oh, you're the least of these. Right. He goes, you're me. Like, interesting. What would I do if I couldn't read? And so he just he just cared. And he didn't always have a lot to offer, but like when he went to that one dude's trailer and the toilet was dirty, he knew how to do it. So he got in there and cleaned that toilet. And, but it wasn't for the least of, or the down, it was just for people like him. And I think that's the big difference, is when you're serving the downtrodden. Like, it's kind of
right.
Yeah. Now you're not the same.
Wow. Right. It's an us and them.
Right. And that's what my dad, that was the gift that he had, was he didn't have to think that through. It just wasn't us and them.
That's a radical admonishment from a pastor.
Right.
Seriously. I mean, because it's taking on the mind of Christ,
right,
who being in the very likeness of God. So he laid down his divinity.
Right.
Can we lay down our intelligence and our wealth to say, actually, we're all the same, and I'm not condescending to you. I am already down with you.
Yeah. I just got back from San Francisco, and I was talking to the Lyft driver about the homeless population, and he said, you know, a lot of these guys were the big tech, or the first big tech boom. They came here, they got on crystal meth, and then tech changed, and they couldn't, because of their drug addiction, they couldn't buckle down and learn a new skill, and now they're on the street.
Wow.
And I mean, that was, I don't know, he just said it, right? I don't have data. But even when you go, oh, wow, I mean, you could have education and a high-paying job, and something just changes.
Right.
And now you're on the street. Like, so it's not even like it may not even be a choice of laying down your stuff. Like, that's just you. Like, you with a couple mistakes, that's you. Or you with a traumatic brain injury.
Right.
That's you. Or I knew a homeless guy in Chicago who his addiction happened because he and his wife were walking across the street. He turned around, the city bus flew by and hit her, killed her on impact 2 feet in front of him.
Wow. And
he tried crack after that. And then it just was a spiral down. Like, what would I do if I hope I wouldn't. I hope I'd have this supportive community, but for goodness sakes. So I don't know. That's the thing is, even knowing like I could be there later. I don't know my future.
The Little Man, go read it. I strongly and genuinely encourage anyone out there to seriously get a hold of this book. How can they? When is it available?
Yeah, it'll. I'll share it. I could probably put it out on the Faith Over Breakfast links page, Instagram, whatever. It'll be out by the end of the month on Amazon.
June 31st at the latest.
Yep, at the latest. It's close. So yeah, I would mean a lot to me, and I think my dad has a lot to teach us.
I agree.